Good evening, all. I'm Namita here, and today, on behalf of Mindtree School team, it's a great honor for us to render a very warm welcome to our distinguished guests, Mr. Mansoor Khan, Mr. Atul Gopal, and our beloved audience to yet another interesting segment of Live Talks, an initiative of Mindtree team to enlighten and inspire its students to pursue their goals. Sam Fuller once said, film is a battleground. This means that each person on every set, be it the actor, producer, cameraman, fashion expert, and even the director, is a true warrior, fighting against all odds to give us a true spectacle of art brought to life. Today, we have with us such a fiery soul in the form of Mr. Mansoor Khan, one of the most hardworking and stupendous filmmakers who have blessed our film industry with wonders of movies. His awe-inspiring works include Jo Jeeta Wahi Sikandar, Akele Hum Akele Tum, Kiamat Se Kiamat Tak, Lagan, and many more to go. Each of them being a masterpiece, bounds audience of every generation and deeply touches their hearts. Mr. Khan's journey had not been a straight route, toddling from being an engineer to a filmmaker to a writer and now to a naturalist who prefers to live far from limelight and near to the nature, thus going through a lot of scrutiny into himself and his true being. He discovered his flaming passion and proved his talent. Today, he is here with us to guide you all in your journeys to follow your heart and intuition. To help us know Mr. Mansoor Khan better, we have amongst us another inspiring personality, Sir Atul Gopal, whose actions do speak louder than his words. Apart from being an IIM Calcutta graduate and founder of Bullseye Institute, he is a vivid cyclist enthusiast. Starting in 2002, he has cycled across India on various routes. He seldom uses cars for traveling in Pune and prefers to ride a bicycle around the city. He has been inspiring people to take up cycling to add knowledge, experience, and a healthy lifestyle to their lives. Team Mindtree welcomes you both with open arms. Humbly giving the stage to Sir Atul now to explore the great mind, Mr. Mansoor Khan. Over to you, sir.
Okay, thank you, Namita ji, and welcome Mansoor once again. So
Pleasure.
I think Namita has been very generous with my introduction, but I think she probably under-introduced you in some sense. You've got a much deeper personality than the one she's described, but nevertheless, so what we'll be doing as a format, if I'll kind of set this thing at the start, is we have about maybe a dozen questions which have come in from our school children. So
Hmm.
of course, the number of questions, there are many more. There are almost 100 questions that came in, out of which we've shortlisted about a dozen. So I'll
Hmm.
be reading out the questions, right? And you could kind of, take your time to kind of. Okay, one second. We'll wait for you to get the camera in place.
Yeah, I'm just putting this a little higher. Okay.
Okay.
I think it's a bit better now. Yeah.
Yep, we can't see your steering wheel now, but that's okay.
Yeah, that was the reason why. I want to look like a serious guy.
Okay. So let's start with the first question, right? This is from our friend Isham, who's studying in class 10th at Mindtree School. And he wants you to talk about one treasured memory from your childhood days, so you could tell us, start from the beginning in some sense. तो क्या बचपन में एक क्या चीज है जो आपको अभी भी बहुत अच्छे से याद है?
तो बचपन की मेमोरीज अगर अच्छी होती हैं तो बहुत सारी अच्छी होती हैं. I hope everybody understands Hindi.
Yeah. Yes, I think you
I'll
can.
speak in English and Hindi both. Okay.
Sure.
So sometimes I do go into Hindi.
ठीक है.
Yeah, childhood, if you've had a happy childhood, you have lots of good memories. So, it would really, really, I mean, I had a very happy childhood, very loving family, excellent school life, and all that. But yeah, obviously, you want to know which is the most cherished memory that I have. Somewhere down the line, though I used to be most of my obsession was some kind of project or the other. So every weekend, I was into tinkering. I had to make some new gadget. It was started with electric motors, then it became some other little gadget, then it became, you know, eavesdropping devices, putting microphones around the house and seeing if I can hear what everybody, which my sister resented. Um, yeah, so experimenting and having a weekly hobby, which my father dreaded, because some of my weekly hobbies consisted digging up the lawn to make a swimming pool, you know, or an underground tunnel or some other destructive stuff like that. So yeah, every weekend was a huge thing for me to look forward to, because I had this kind of a project, and I had my trusted friend who would come over and both of us would carry out this. But apart from that, I mean, this was the technical side of me. On the other side, which has always been there and which has probably now flourished, is this wanting to live close to the close to nature kind of thing. So we used to have a land outside Bombay in Panvel, and it was just a barren land. There was nothing. It was hot and everything, but we used to love going there. At least I used to. And for me, that was probably that childhood connect with open spaces, and running around the field, exploring the little hill nearby. And truth be told, it was so exciting for me to go to that land that I would also take it on to myself to plant vegetables, which if I tell my kids to do today, they'll won't listen to me. So it was just something which was from within, this whole pleasure of the open space, the wild, but also this whole idea of planting something and watching it grow. You would come back the next week and it has grown a little bit. There was somebody there to look after it, of course. So that whole experience, that farm experience, used to be something something extraordinary for me. And there were little projects there also, constructing a little structures to go and sit inside and do all sorts of things. But I would say, yeah, in terms of outdoor experience, that was the most. Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, great. So the connect to nature has been there from your early days, and the connect to engineering also has been there from your early days. That's in a nutshell what you're saying. Okay, so we'll just pick up one of the threads, which is the engineering thread. And obviously, not too many people were aware probably before this session, at least amongst our students, that you did have that little bit of an engineering background. So the middle class dream, of course, like you said in that film song, I think पापा कहते हैं बड़ा नाम करेगा, इंजीनियर का काम करेगा, वगैरह वगैरह. ठीक है. तो इंजीनियर का काम आपने भी किया. Seems to be a very autobiographical song in some sense, right? But before we get on to the dropping out phase, I think there is a student, Anika Gupta from class 10th A, who wants to know that you studied at both IIT and at MIT, probably the best that India and the US have to offer. And this is the typical middle class curiosity, Mansoor. They just want to contrast the two. So IIT कैसा था और MIT कैसा था और दोनों के फर्क के बीच में क्या फर्क था? So over to you.
Yeah. So see, IIT is, as everyone knows, it's a very, very rigorous, very, and so was MIT. So IIT was not a very pleasurable experience for me. It's a great college. It is just that it was too intense for me, very honestly, And there were some things I liked and some, but it was just too intense. Before I went to MIT, when I went from IIT, I transferred to Cornell University. Yeah, correct. Actually, I didn't transfer. I started all over again. I started from first year again there. For me, Cornell was very different from both IIT and MIT. And the reason is that Cornell is a diverse discipline university.
Correct.
Whereas IIT and MIT are both very technology intensive, So really speaking, I really like the American teaching method and the whole approach and the flexibility and how you can ask questions and how you can approach there was a lot of flexibility which I found in general in the American system. But between the two of them, I'm just stuffing this in because, like I said, for me, I got an opportunity to explore. See, in IIT and MIT, they don't insist on taking what do they
all,
call
all engineering courses.
ancillary credits, like from other disciplines.
Okay.
So for instance, in Cornell, I could take philosophy, I took astronomy, I took music, and I took anthropology. Anthropology is the one I'll come back to later, because that has played a huge role in my thinking and my next. So anyway, when I did these things, these other subjects, I found it can expand your mind beyond just engineering. So sadly, when I went to MIT, also it was at MIT also it was purely focused on engineering. So in between, I got this little experience of Cornell. But between MIT and IIT, if that is your question, I would say that that MIT, I mean, not because it's the creme de la creme kind of thing, but they have a slight more flexibility of approach. That's what I wish, that IIT, I mean, in India, obviously it was so much to do with the job, somebody, which is why the middle class kid who did well and who got into IIT was like his life is made kind of thing.
Correct.
From the point of view of getting a good job, engineering job. But I really feel, and even more as time has gone by, I really feel that any engineering institute, whether it be a very elite one or not, it should have this diversity of
Courses.
studies, of courses, because it's not only an engineering world. You do need to understand. Now we are realizing, you need to understand sociology, you need to understand ecology. So there should be some which IIT doesn't have.
Some kind of liberal arts kind of thing, if you want to
yes,
like it.
yeah. They were called selectives. You could select a certain number of credits.
Correct.
So outside your main course, I mean, if I was planning to go into computer science,
right,
then I had to take certain other
compulsory courses,
minimum credits in these.
Correct.
That's what I feel. What I did like more about IIT was of course, this is just a physical thing, that it's a campus. So you're living there and everything. Everybody's there. It's a whole community. At MIT, there were a lot of people who were living off campus. Sorry. I was trying to put something off, but
there's the videos which you need to put on again. The audio is on. If you just press, then you'll kind of say video button will be there, which would have been crossed out now. Yep, you're back.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. So you're talking about MIT being off campus versus
I was
IIT
off
being
campus.
on
Yeah. So for me, it was a very different experience, because I joined after 2 years of Cornell.
Sure.
Because I was joining in the third year, the hostel rooms and all had already been taken.
Sure.
So I had to stay off campus. So I can't exactly equate, because I think living on a campus is a huge part of the experience of being in a college. I mean, a residential college. Yeah.
Right.
But MIT was even more intensive. I mean, it's really, it was really hard. Now I don't know whether I dropped out because it was really hard, or did I drop out because my mind was shifting. Actually, it was a bit of both. So my mind and my thinking was already shifting. So I cannot fully judge MIT because I was there only for one term.
Oh,
whereas,
okay.
Yeah. So Cornell, I was there for 4 terms. I was for 2 years in Cornell.
Right.
IIT, I was 1.5 years roughly. And I realized that I'm not getting to do what I want, which was electronics. And, that electronics still doesn't exist in IIT.
Electrical. It used to be electrical.
It's completely different. Yeah. So, so obviously my biggest experience was Cornell. And
you're quite happy with the place.
Very much. But again, wo keeda tha, that little bug was there, because I was doing well in Cornell. And so the little bug was, hey, why don't I try and transfer to MIT? That little cap in my feather kind of thing. Yeah. So for no good reason, I transferred to MIT. And of course, I was thrilled that I got in because of my grades and stuff. But it was not. It's narrow. When you're in an engineering institute, an institute of technology, specifically, then it's very, very focused. You're only talking mainly technology. Yeah.
Right. Okay. And I think I got lost in between my connection, but I was just telling you that I've been to Ithaca, which is where Cornell is located, and I found the campus to be lovely. although I believe that winters tend to be a little bit bleak over there, but do you think if you had continued in Cornell, you would have probably been happier? Matlab, the shift to MIT was probably just a kind of a bad decision.
Yes, I
Okay.
think so. I think
Okay.
so.
Right.
I had a whole set of friends there.
Right.
Uh, my girlfriend was there. And,
Okay.
life is hard, yeah, if you just leave everybody and go on. So I don't know. Obviously, MIT attracted me more than all my friends. But that was just that kida, I must get to the hottest place on earth
Correct.
kind of thing. Yeah.
Correct. Okay, fair enough. So Ishika from class 9D
Mm,
has a very obvious question.
yes.
That when you dropped out of MIT, that was the second time in your life you were dropping out, and it was a very short life by that point of time. So what
Mm.
was their reaction like? Kya phir se kar diya Mansoor tumne ye, that kind of thing. What was exactly? So as a kids, they just want to know what did your parents say and how did you react?
Well, Ishika, my parents were very unusual. So my father was only too happy that I came back. Actually, the ironic thing and the funny thing is that when I was going abroad, see, he was as it is wondering why I joined IIT, but then he knew I had this thing. When I was going abroad, he was like, why do you want to go abroad? I started this company, of making films. Why don't you make films? And at that point of time, I would have never imagined I would make films, So to me, it sounded like a joke. I said, come on, yeah, like who wants to make films, I'm an engineer. I want to know how the universe works and that kind of stuff. So I went abroad. So when I came back, my father and let me tell you, I just bought a ticket one day and I just landed back. They didn't even know I was coming back. So I didn't ask their permission or I didn't see what would they would have said. But the moment I landed up and I could see on my father's expression that he was only too happy that I came back. But that is more out of paternal love than caring about my studies.
Okay.
So yeah, so that was his reaction. But somewhere I think in some strange way, what he was hoping that I would do did happen.
Sure.
And I did make films, but it was not my first choice. It was not my first choice.
Okay. And thank God you did. Huh?
Oh, I'm glad because honestly, I got a chance to prove myself in some way because up till then I was feeling tremendously guilty for
Right.
having gone through this whole thing, spent so much of their money, and then just suddenly give it up, kind of thing.
Sure. But we'll still not leave engineering because there's one more question coming
Yes,
related
sure.
to engineering, and then we'll move on to the films part. So I don't know who has asked this question, but one of our students also wants to know how has engineering impacted the rest of your life. So they just want to know that because filmmaking and engineering don't seem to have a very big connect. And later on, the stuff that you're doing, of course, the book does contain a lot of science and technology, the third curve that you've written. So
Mhm.
would you like to answer that?
Well, see, the thing is that engineering or studying science or any kind of formal, structured method of logic analysis and all that, it helps you in today's world. So that kind of thing helps you because you can understand numbers, you can understand devices, you can figure out this, you can figure out that. So in that sense, it helped me. Even when I was shooting my film, I would know a little bit more about the technical side of
Cameras.
the sound recording. Particularly, I was never very cinematic oriented. So I'm a very basic photographer, so the camera part I would just leave to the cameraman. But I mean, the other technical things, if anything was needed in terms of constructing the shot, but mainly the sound recording, the quality. And I was also into music myself. So of course
Yes.
that has got nothing to do with engineering. But even for music recording, my engineering side would come in because I could guide the recordist and tell him, hey, why don't you boost the bass, or the mids are going here, or things like that. And they would take me a little more seriously. Any other director, they would have said, just shut up and do your job. They would they would have not listened to him. But because they knew I came from here, and I was talking their language. I was not just saying, "Arey, acha nahi lag raha hai. Arey, kuch khatak raha hai." That is a very, I mean, obviously,
They say.
uh, no, I mean, somebody who's not like a sound conscious, technically person would say that. But obviously the recorders would appreciate it more if I'm able to put it in slightly more technical terms. So it did help me.
Correct, correct, correct.
Yeah, that helped me. And then I had also started a video company in between.
Okay.
Before I directed my first film. So
Hmm.
I had actually started the first video studio, small one, where in Bombay when video was unheard of. You know, there was Doordarshan, and it was all sponsored. I mean, there were only sponsored programs. You know, there was no real scene. Today, kids, I mean, all your kids today will wonder whether there was a world like that, but there was when there was no video, and the the ability to edit on video is very different. Today, you're
Hmm.
editing digital videos, you know, but earlier video was tape. Okay, so
Yes,
it was on
yes,
tape. Now, tape
correct.
is very different from film. A
Hmm.
film you can physically cut and join. You know,
Correct.
um, can your audience see me also? Are they
Yeah,
able to
yeah,
see me?
yeah, yeah, yeah. Everybody can see you.
Where I'm doing some gestures and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah,
So film is a very physical medium, and you can actually put up a film, and you can actually see which frame you're on. So
sure.
it is a very tangible medium. But
Correct,
videotape is magnetic. You don't know where that frame is. You know,
correct,
you
correct,
can't
correct.
just physically cut a videotape and join it, and there'll be a
Hmm.
bump in it. Then you know. So
Hmm.
there were no means to do that. And when I came back from US in 1980, around that time, 80, 81, the first Umatic recorders came out where you could actually do this kind of electronic editing.
Okay.
So I was very somehow uh, what shall I say, thrilled about this whole thing that you don't need to develop the film, you just shoot
Film.
it, or you know what I mean, and instantly you can
Yes.
see.
Sure,
So
sure,
it's
sure.
more of a techno fantasy that I had for video, but which later on helped me in my film work also. So this kind of knowledge helped me start that video studio. You know, to talk to the editor, to talk to the this thing, to decide what equipment to buy, understand all the different things that go into it. You know, so yes, it did help me in that way.
Okay, okay. Right. So you're kind of part of the technicians ka biradari in a way. They kind of would consider you, a fellow technician in some sense, and that gave you a little bit more respect, if I were to say so. Hmm?
Mostly yes, but as sound recordists go in the film world, they don't like somebody who knows.
Too
So I
much.
had a real tough time with. I won't take any names, but I had a real tough time with one of them who just, I mean, he thought he was God. You know, so there was a time when in Hindi film industry the post recordist, you know, what is called the final recording mix. Uh,
Right.
that person was considered God. You
Okay.
know, and nobody, the director would shiver in front of him.
Okay.
Kind of thing, yeah.
ठीक
But
ठीक है.
I had a particular, let's say, sensibility of what kind of sound I like to hear, where I want the mids higher, what is the level of background music I want, which kind of sound effect. I don't like this slap sound is sounding like, you know, somebody's taking a ruler and whacking it on a plywood, you know. So I would demand that these things be done differently, because there was a certain format and people used to just
Hmm.
follow the format. You know, there was
Correct.
stand like for instance uh, a sound of a fist hitting would be attack. It would be. I said, what is this sound here? This doesn't sound like, you know, there should be some. I know it has to be stylized, but it,
Hmm.
it
Hmm.
can't sound like that. So if
Hmm.
you look at some of the old, yeah, so this is where I would so it would be plus and minus.
Hmm.
Mostly I would say when I did the music recording and when I did the song recording, the music recordist, the first day he gave me this look like, okay, now you don't tell me too much.
Hmm.
But as he worked along, he realized that I'm not saying it because I'm trying to uh,
Impress him
take
about who's the
or take
boss or
away any
whatever.
power from him. Right.
Hmm. Hmm.
And gradually he realized that I know why I'm saying something. I'm not
Okay.
just saying it for the heck of it, or you know, because I would give him an example, or I would say, you know, how about this and how about that. And you won't believe it, Atul, that at the end of it, when I had to re-record the film, because that other God recordist messed it up. Okay.
Okay. ठीक
So
है.
we had to go through the whole exercise to do
Oh,
it all
oh.
over again. And I came back to this recordist who had done my music. And he didn't have that equipment. It was one of those studios, music studios, which was getting run.
Simple. Hmm.
Yeah, no, old, you know. They didn't have the multi-track recorders which you need 16 track recorders. One has got sound, one has got effects, one has got atmosphere. They didn't have that. But I still chose to come back to him because I had a rapport with him.
Correct.
And you won't
Correct.
believe it that when we were doing that mix, the mixer is sacred. That is the recordist territory. The director cannot put his finger and just move something. He'll get whacked.
Whack. Okay.
Yeah. So you won't believe it, but Ashok, his name was Ashok. For the final mix, he said, Mansoor, you take these 4 faders.
Okay.
And I take these 6 faders.
Because
yeah, and that was the kind of
rapport that you had with him.
Yeah, and a sense of respect that I got from him later. Yeah.
Great. Okay. In fact, let me tell you that possibly I must make a confession over here. I've not seen Qayamat Se Qayamat Tak, and my friends will be horrified when they hear this. But I have remembered all the songs. I think you had a really amazing sense of, I don't know, whoever, my film industry knowledge is very poor, but amazing. I think they defined the genre of music in the 90s or whatever, So anyway, coming back to the next question, again, I'm not too sure who's asked this question, but this is a slightly different one, again, related to filmmaking. But so how much does the family background matter for success? Maybe the question asker is hinting more towards the film industry, but you could generalize. So a slightly more personal question, but how would you want to take this question?
No, so again, see, now today we are talking about a world of nepotism and all that, but I don't think that, I think that by and large, if you notice how many film people where the second generation has come in and they have been damn good actors or damn good directors or so it is not just because of nepotism that they got in. There is obviously a subconscious learning that happens. Now, to answer your question in a different way, I never thought I would make films. Correct.
Yeah,
and I was focusing fully on engineering and science and technology and computers and whatnot. But when I came back, I wanted to explore. Actually, the main reason why I was doing was I wanted to prove to my father that I'm not useless. So that sentiment is what Jo Jeeta Wohi Sikandar is all about. Jo Jeeta Wohi Sikandar is about a son who has to live up to his father's image. Yeah. So, but what I mean is that when I started writing, and there was a lot of subconscious learning which was coming out of my head. I used to remember how my father used to discuss a story with his scriptwriter. How would he work out the scenes? How would he select or reject a scene? What reasons he would give for it? So subconsciously, if you are in a particular family, so whether it be films or whether it be business or whether it be trading or whatever it is, of course, not everyone from there will either think, but it does help. Because if I go back to look at it, that's where I learned. I subconsciously learned what makes a scene interesting. I subconsciously learned where should the story not flag. I subconsciously learned what should be my camera, what kind of shots should I take. So I used to follow my dad on the set, and I used to watch him when he was doing his shot division, and then when he was instructing actors or when he was instructing the cinematographer. Okay, I want this kind of a shot. So it was subconscious learning happening. So it definitely helps. But you will find many families in which the next generation was not able to do as well. But there's no replacement for direct learning.
Sure.
So I had that opportunity. I didn't realize it, but I had it. Yeah.
Correct. In fact, talking about the teaching profession, one of the things that we've seen is what makes for good teachers is if your father or mother has been a teacher. It helps because that kind of subconscious learning also happens in the teaching community. So you're right, it's not just a matter of any single profession. If you want to call it nepotism, it probably exists in all professions. So
yeah.
Okay. This is again moving on a little bit. There's a student Vinya from class 9C, and she is a budding author. And her problem is that somehow she gets stuck at the ideation stage. So she wants some advice related to that. वो कभी-कभी blank हो जाता है, you don't know where to start, that kind of thing, and you kind of been writing a lot of your own films. So what advice would you give to a person like Vinya?
Yes. So Vinaya, this is something which I had to learn myself, and I discovered it. So it was first I was doing something, and then I said, "What am I doing?" And I kind of analyzed it later. And of course, I read a couple of books and spoke to. So basically, as any writer or any, I might particularly talk from a film point of view. Uh, there is something called premise, and you have to have your premise clear in your mind first. And your premise is just a one line. Your premise is not a one page, two-page thing. That is a short form of your story. So first you have a premise, then you have a story, and then you have screenplay. Okay. So premise is and you can try this as an exercise. You go watch a film, and then later on you try and guess what the premise of that film was. So
Okay.
for instance, like Jo Jeeta Wohi Sikandar is a loser who learns to be a winner. You know, so that is the single line premise. Now I could have told that story in 100 different ways.
Correct. Correct.
Yeah, and through so, but the premise would still be your guiding, your anchor. It would be your center. Now, the same film, Jo Jeeta Wohi Sikandar, a loser who becomes a winner, could have been about boxing, or it could have been about, you know, winning
Business.
a school prize or business or whatever. But the premise doesn't change. Only the events change. So the really starting point is many people think that if you have to be an author, you just sit and say it was a dark night and you start that way. No, you don't start that way. All nights are dark. So that's not how you start, because that's how I used to try to write in school. When I
Right.
wanted to write I wanted to write a book, I wanted to be Enid Blyton. I would start
Okay.
off with kind of a sentence very, very, very enthusiastically and ambitiously, and I had no clue what the next sentence is going to be. You know,
Right.
so the most important thing is your premise. But so that's your starting point. Then you need to know roughly what your plot is. Where are you trying to get to in the end? Roughly. This is roughly. The fleshing out you will do later. So we know from the premise itself, that the loser becomes a winner means he starts as a loser and ends as a winner. And what all happens in between. Then the next very, very important thing are the characters. And you can have a very nice story, but if you don't have interesting, tasty, believable, entertaining characters, then your story will not happen. So you have to take it. So each of these are elements, but the first element which comes in is the premise.
Right.
You have your premise, then you have your plot. Okay, and you can keep improving your plot as you go along. There's no rule, but you have a rough plot. You say, okay, it starts somewhere here. There is normally what is called in script writing. The three parts: the intro, the body, and the conclusion.
Conclusion.
Yeah, three-part writing is very popular now. There are four-part. Actually, Hindi movies are four-part because we have an interval in the middle.
Okay.
So it sadly breaks up the body into, it's a very odd style of writing. So it is very, very challenging, but that has become its own form, four-part story that way. But there are these standard things which you can take guidance from. There are books on this, but all these of course fall secondary to your style. So you have
Okay.
to develop your own style beyond that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. So I'm also a budding author, and I don't think I will end up ever writing about films. I will keep on writing about electric vehicles and so on. But I think you've given some
Mm,
pointers to another budding author over here. Great. But you're
mm,
right. I think the
mm,
dark and sporty night is something which I have also tried a lot of times in the past, and it
mm,
really kind of doesn't go beyond a couple of pages. Then you really kind of start running out. Okay. So next question, again connected to stories, maybe films to some extent. So according to you, or so one of the students has asked this question: what are the kind of stories slash films that manage to attract large audience? So when you write for the masses, what kind of things do you need to keep in mind?
See, it's obviously any story which relates to. I mean, people can relate to themselves. So obviously, love stories are very high on the list because everybody sooner or later either falls in love, whether they're successful or not. But they do experience that phase of their life. So love stories will always be a very broad genre. It'll be a very broad genre. And
Sure.
so similarly, epics will be a broad genre. Like if you're talking about like Mughal-e-Azam, you know, Akbar, you know. So epics also will have a broad thing because everybody connects with it. You know, all the people from that country will connect with it. Shivaji or, any other thing like that. So these are very broad ones. But one must not, I mean, one should also recognize what is your genre. And you should not try to make sure that you expand that genre for the maximum audience because sometimes you lose a flavor of what you are. So I don't agree with the thing of maximizing your audience, you know. So yes, you want to maximize your audience within that genre. Let's say if I'm doing a film which is about rape, now that is a very horrific subject. So not everybody would like to see that film, okay? Or if it is something else which is narrow, let's say a legal drama. So legal drama will also have a separate audience, you know. So one has to be true to that genre. You try to expand it within that. So within the legal drama, you try to make it as tasty and interesting and get the maximum people. But if you ask whether it be a legal guy or whether it be a criminal or whatever, the idea of romance and love is the most common, you know. So that will always be the biggest genre, and you will find that the biggest films were always love stories. Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, changing tracks from scripts to direction, we have Manya Saxena from class 10B who wants to know what exactly is the role of the director. You know, so you have to get the characters to emote, you know, so all that is kind of given. But is there anything else as a director that you need to keep in mind?
Absolutely, absolutely. See, everybody thinks that the director is the guy who says action and cut, you know, and who says, no, 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 I want you to laugh more. No, 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 I want you to cry more. That is only the nitty-gritty part of it, you know. So the real definition of the director is that he is a storyteller. So fundamentally, the director should be a good storyteller. It is just that his medium is through a camera, you know. Like supposing right now I was to tell a story to you, I don't need a camera. I'm just standing in front of you and telling you a story. And my gestures, my expressions, my tone, you know, I am using these elements to tell you a story.
Sure.
Then you come to theater, when you come to stage, now your elements have expanded. Now you have a stage, you have curtains, you have lights, you have rings, you know, you have certain props. So the the director is still basically telling a story, but through a slightly more complex medium. And then when you come to film, now you're telling the story through an even more complex medium. But the role of the director is still the role of the storyteller. So he should be called the storyteller. I don't know why they call him the director.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what makes for good storytelling?
Now that is an age-old question. It's an age-old question. But like I said, my father was a very good storyteller. And when I say not only in his films, but in day-to-day life,
Okay.
I mean, he could keep people entertained. He had a terrific sense of humor, and he had a terrific sense of timing. You know, because so all that comes into it. If I'm telling you an episode, if my sense of timing is not good, that episode will be very boring. You know, and you must have experienced that with a lot of even teachers or preachers and all. You know, they're trying to do a good thing, but they're so very boring. So even a teacher has to be a good storyteller, really, if you ask me.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, so this was something that I learned watching my father, you know, and it is something that one is that you instinctively pick up, and two is you have to consciously think about it yourself, you know. So you have to arrange the things in your mind in a way in which uh, the whole process of telling the story, which is why you have these classic rules, you know. The first one third is introduction, then the body. Many people break that rule, you know. So there is no rule really. It depends on your craft. It depends on. So yeah, but the one thing that you have to do, see, you could be telling a story which is either very true to life, so you're a very realistic storyteller, or you could be telling a fantasy like Harry Potter, you know.
Sure.
Yeah, that is an imaginary magic world, but there are certain elements which will still be the same, whether you're talking about a fantasy imaginary world or a very real world of real characters. So storytelling has been defined by tens of thousands, if not more, people, hundreds of thousands of people. But yes, there would be broad categories. But again, like I told you, what matters is that the storyteller knows his premise, because that is his rudder, that is his guiding line.
Correct.
Yeah, no matter what happens, there is a premise. That is the objective. That is the central thread. And how to weave the central thread without making it obvious,
Right.
is the craft of telling the story.
So one ancillary thing. So one, you've told a very very insightful thing. So if any of you want to get into film direction, or you need to be very good at storytelling yourself in real life. If you're not that, then the chances of you becoming a director are not very good. That's what Mansoor, you were saying, right?
Yeah, I mean, there are some directors who are very technical directors, so they're technically so engaged, and I'm not saying that you can, but even then, so like even then, they have some idea. Like there are a lot of films which are very techno oriented. So what is holding you is the visual, the grandness, the technique, the cutting, the what I'm trying to say. But yes, somewhere inside that, the guy also knows the story he's telling. Otherwise, sometimes you can also get misguided. You do such a technically good film, but it doesn't work.
Sure.
It has most brilliant special effects and stuff like that. So
Correct.
some directors will be more towards storytelling. Their camera taking is very simple. The camera doesn't move much. There's no big fat cutting technique. Editing, editing is the heart of filmmaking. For all your students who, your students who are, for those who are interested. My father used to always tell me. He used to tell me that editing is the lifeline, or the basic grammar, because you're not shooting a film in one shot. You're taking different shots. So you should be knowing how. So the whole understanding of how those shots will come together, and what is the significance of each shot. There can be just a little shot of something happening, or an expression or something which will enhance that moment tremendously. So each one of these things come into yeah.
Right. So one related thing which kind of strikes my mind, when you talked of the premise, right? Is it something that the director should believe in? Like, for example, is it something which comes from your heart? Only then you end up making a great film, or you just borrow a premise and say, okay, justice always does not win, or something like that. Which something maybe you don't have a belief in, but you're doing it because it's popular or whatever. So, what's your take on that?
Yeah, so many people, you're right. Many times people do that. They think like honesty always wins, something like that, but then they'll get preachy, it'll become very literal. It'll become very direct. That's what I meant by a good storyteller, where the premise doesn't come and hit you in the face, You're not all the time saying, this is my premise, this is my premise, So obviously, if the person believes in it, it helps. Because if he believes in it, one is that he will add flavor and texture to that perspective or to that content. I mean, there are so many layers in a film. Right from like your student who asked, does the director only check the emotion? Well, very much so. I mean, if I'm looking at an actor and now everything else is set, my shot is set, I know my story, I know my scene, but it's the director has to have a sense of, I wanted it played only so much. I didn't want it played beyond that. You know what I mean? So it's like a cook who says, oh, I only this little bit of spice. I just So he has to have an inner sense of what is working towards the narrative. So he's seeing the film in his mind. Yeah, he cannot get carried away. Kya kya shot kiya, yaar. He bawled out, and no, I mean, I had moments like this with my actors. In Qayamat Se Qayamat Tak, there was a scene just after interval. I don't know how many of kids have seen the movie, but Amir is basically, he has been found out that he is in love with the enemy's daughter. So his father and uncle are waiting down, and they have called him down to question him. So this was the scene we were going to shoot that morning. And I was taking the shot of Dilip Tahil, who plays Amir's father, and Alok Nath was his uncle. So it was their shot. So when I placed the shot and I said, Dilip, Amir has just walked in and you're looking at him. So Dilip says, I'm not going to just sit here and look at him. I'm so angry, I'm going to jump up and shout at him. So I said, Dilip, hold on, yeah. He says, no, I mean, I'm a Rajput. I'm an angry guy. I've shot a guy at the beginning of the film. And this is what I'm going to do, because I cannot tolerate that I said, Dilip, I said, after you jump up in the very first moment, what will you do for the rest of the scene? Are you going to dance around him? Are you going to jump? I said, don't you want to pace out your anger? Don't you think it'll be more tasty if you're kind of holding yourself back and waiting for him to say something wrong, and then you let him have it? So this is the kind of stuff that the director has to have very consciously. I was a first time director. I was a kid, yeah. So I could have got bullied. Yeah, okay, you do what you want here, because he's a big time theater actor. Who am I to say? But that's where I feel that all these are nuances which have to be clear in the. And when I say director, I mean the storyteller's mind. Yeah, in the story.
Sure. So when you see the big picture very clearly, the details kind of automatically emerge in a way.
Yes. So and of course, a lot depends on style. So another director might have chosen that he gets up and jumps all over the room, and his film might also have been a hit. I'm not saying no. I'm not saying categorically it's wrong. It depends on what is your tone of your film. What is the sensibility of your film? So it would not fit in with the sensibility of this film. Yeah.
Okay. Right. So movies continue to be the favorite area for So Jasmeet Kaur from 10th standard, she wants to what's the film that's most inspired you? And is there any of your films that you'd like to tinker around or change with? So maybe we could just give a very short one, because we're running a bit short of time. A lot more questions, and we're also going to have an open house at the end. So if you could kind of give a very brief
I'll
answer.
say very briefly, because my favorites fall in different genres. In the genre of my dad's style of filmmaking, which was romantic comedy musical, romantic musical films. My favorite all-time favorite is Tisri Manzil.
Okay.
Now, I don't know if the kids have seen it, but Tisri Manzil is, according to me, the ultimate suspense film ever made in India. And so the whole that is because it's because to hold suspense is very difficult. It's very easy to create suspense. I can create suspense. The guy sitting in a room, he hears a sound, he goes and opens the door, and there is smoke outside. So I've created suspense, but how do I resolve it? At the end of the day, at the end of the movie, I have to explain why was there smoke outside, why. So yeah, so that film was extremely good because it was good in all these genres. It was intense, in the crime, in the entertainment, in the music, So that in that genre, that was my best favorite film. Now, in the other one, if I'm talking only about Indian films, I really loved Saransh, which is a Bhatt film, yeah, which is a very, very simple yet very, very emotional film, and with a really, really hard-hitting ending and stuff. So it's an emotional film. An elderly couple have lost their son. He had gone abroad. The mother still believes, she's religious. She still believes that he'll come back one day. And the father is a bit of an agnostic. He's like, he's gone. What are you talking about? So it was very well played, And a girl comes there, and that girl happens to be pregnant. And how the mother starts believing, that's my child. That's my son who's coming back. And what a fabulous, I love the psychological play, the emotional play, and also very well shot, very well enacted. So that is my favorite, yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, so we have one student, I'll particularly name her because she ends up asking very good questions. I always end up selecting one question that she is asking. This is Reet Mahajan from class 10C, right? And her question is, actually she's got 2-3 questions, but let me ask with the first one. So is life like a movie? So this is perennial. So does it imitate life or vice versa? So what's your take on that?
Well, my life has gone through a horror movie, first a happy movie, then a horror movie, then a redemption movie. So I've lived four movies in my life. So, but I must say, yeah. So, the truth is that life does start imitating art, because we've had so many movies that then you start seeing how your life is following a certain kind of story or a certain kind of movie that you have seen. But I don't believe, personally, I don't believe in looking at films to guide my life. Personally, I don't, They may, but obviously, in a movie, uh, there's a lot of liberty that the writer can take. So I really, I don't think that life really imitates, unless you really start. And that's the problem. A lot of people start getting influenced by the films that they see, and they expect the same to happen in their life.
Correct.
And that can be very delusional. So obviously there's an overlap. Obviously, art follows life and life follows art. There is a cross between both of them, but you have to weigh them separately and decide which should you decide. Yeah.
So her next question, Mansoor, is that is Kunur giving you the life that you've been searching for?
Absolutely.
Okay, it is.
Absolutely.
Okay. Now, this is one question which should have actually come much earlier on, right? But you've been spending a lot of time talking about sustainable living, right? You've written a great book. I managed to finish reading that book, and I like the premise that it's not really, it's all about energy, right? It's how we are able to manage energy in that sense, right? So what is it that the world needs to do for economic sustainability? And the subsidiary question, what can individuals do at their own for this particular economic sustainability, if I were to define a new term?
Well, see, so economic sustainability is a phrase which can be very tricky. If your economic model is based on perpetual growth, then it is basically an impossible model. So to use the word sustainability after that is an oxymoron. So yeah, it's two contradictory terms that we are putting together. So if by economics you mean a growth-based economic system, then it can never be sustainable. So let's get clear, because most people, when they think of economics, and today our world is based on interest-based money,
Yes.
So you imagine automatically when somebody says economics, and this is taught in Economics 101, I'm sure, that if I lend Atul a lakh of rupees, then Atul has to give me interest. Now this is a built-in. So I'm saying this whole thing is built on a false premise. So any economics that is built on perpetual growth, which is compounding interest-based money, is basically a fallacy. So what kind of economics we need to evolve for it to be sustainable? Very different. So you have to come to a steady state economics. The world is to always run on steady state economics. Yeah, so that is the only way. So first you have to really give it a, don't say economic sustainability when you mean this kind of economics. Then it doesn't work.
So we're talking of a world where interest rates are close to zero, which is what is happening in the West, right? So that means that compound interest is also zero.
Absolutely. You have to forget about the idea of interest rates. So in fact, see, I'm not a religious person, but when I was young, and because I was born in a Muslim family, I was always told interest haram hai.
Yes.
And there's a
yes.
Yeah. Now, so interest is a sin, because if I become a person who's only giving interest to people, then I'm doing nothing in my life.
Correct.
So from a social evil perspective, it's an evil, because it makes me lazy, and I'm saying, okay, Atul, here's 10 lakhs. Now you work on it and give me 7% back. So socially, it's an evil, And B, the other side is that interest cannot keep accruing because it's a finite world,
Absolutely.
So from both points of view, it doesn't make sense. Yeah.
Correct.
So that has to go. That has to go. In fact, the newer thinking, and I'm sure your kids are going to come across it somewhere or the other, is the whole idea of zero growth. There's a book I've written a part in. Oops, sorry. I'm going to take the trouble to pull it out to show it to you.
Sure.
Okay, now this is a serious book. I've just written one chapter in it.
Okay.
It's called Post-Growth Thinking in India. Okay. So the idea of questioning growth has now come of age. We are living in a post-growth world. Because it's a finite world. We finished half, and the second half is going down, which is what my book said. So this thinking is inevitable. So to talk about 0% interest rate is inevitable. Your idea of interest-based money is going to go, and you can see they're trying to perpetuate it. Interest-based money, but it is becoming more and more false. I think your image has frozen. Atul?
I think, sir, his connectivity issue on his end. He's just joining. Yes, he's there.
Yeah.
Okay. I was a bit worried it was my end.
Yeah, I couldn't.
Atul, sir, sorry to interrupt. Can you just ask the audience if they, for their an open house, if they can put up the
Yeah,
questions?
I think a lot of them have already put up the questions, Namita. But
Yeah, I cannot see them, but then not on the chat. Just
Acha, because I could see a lot of people who've raised their hands. I don't know whether you made note of that or not. Okay. We cannot see you still, Mansoor. I think you need to put the video on again, please.
Sir, his
I
video
can-
is on. Sir, his video is on.
Oh, okay. Okay. So I think, Mansoor, we kind of got interrupted where you were talking about, the absence of interest. And it's very interesting for a person who's going to get into pension mode very soon, retirement, that how do you kind of plan for a life outside of fixed deposit? Because that's where most of my monies have been invested in. But I think that's something that I'll take a call on. Okay. So let's move on to the end of our questions. And then we have an open house where we have a lot of people waiting to ask you questions. And with your permission, is it okay if we stretch it a little bit, because we've kind of taken a time from you till 5:30, but we're already kind of
No, I'm
20 minutes
okay.
ahead?
I'm
You're
okay.
okay. Okay,
I
fair
have no
enough. So
problem.
we'll continue maybe for about 35 minutes more, depending on how many
No
people. I can see my friend Vibhuti Bhushan has been raising his hand for a long time, and he's been quite this thing. Okay. So Manisha Ajmani from 9th A asks a question. How do you connect the dots between films, cheese, and the third curve? So what's the connection?
Okay. So yeah, even before that, so the connection between engineering, films, cheese.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
So engineering comes from this whole thing in school where you have friends who have that kind of interest. So you also pick up that interest, and of course, it interested me also, gadgets and this and that and all that. I came out of that not intending to go into films. So the connection to films is, as I always like to say, is that I only made films so that I could prove to my father that I'm not useless. I had really no other intention of making films. So the film connection is like an add-on in between. So actually, I wanted to jump from dropping out of engineering to straight away going and living on a small farm. Like I'm doing now. So that's what I would have done. So anyway, but the film thing is good because it tested me. I had to walk, the distance. I had to, what I'm trying to say, prove myself in a certain way, not simply because I want to do it, but hey, how do I do this and how do I do it well? So, coming to the farm, and cheese was actually, so living on a farm was the ultimate plan, really. Cheese was never part of the plan, but since my wife didn't agree to move with me when I left Bombay, I had to convince her somehow.
Okay.
So that was.
She likes cheese a lot.
So, yeah, she loves cheese, and I also knew that she would like to. She has the aptitude to learn things like that, but she basically wanted to know what the hell would she do if she came here. She didn't want to become one of those club-going, card-playing kind of ladies, So
Right.
So that's how
she's
cheese
got
came
something.
into.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Again, Reet Majan coming up with the last question from my side, and then we'll have an open house now. So do you encourage school children or school trips visiting you in Kunnur at your farm?
Oh, we've had lots of them. We have lots of them.
Great.
So apart from day visits where schools have just come for a day visit and I take them through the whole, what are we doing? I talk to them, I show them the farm. Then of course I give them these thoughts about the third curve and, why these things are happening and a little bit about my life and all that. Then they go up and they milk the cows. They'll watch the cheese making happening. And then they'll fire questions at me. But apart from the day visit, we've had at least 7 or 8 schools that have come and stayed here for 2 or 3 nights.
Okay, great.
Yeah. So yeah, we encourage that a lot.
Okay, so just for the information of people who don't know, there's a very beautiful homestay that Mansoor runs called Acres Wild. You can check out the website. As of now, you will find there is no accommodation over there thanks to the pandemic. But it would be a great idea if some of you could kind of actually visit over there and stay at that place. I plan to do that personally as soon as Mansoor allows me to do so, right? But okay, now
Welcome.
I'm going to hand over the session. I'm going to push off my video, and Namita is going to be the one who is going to decide which questions need to kind of be coming in. You know. So
Okay.
thank you so much from my side, Mansoor. Great chatting up with you. We've kind of taken a lot more time that we've expected. I think another 15-20 minutes more to go. So I'll see
No
you at the
problem.
end of the talk. Namita ji, please take over. I'm stopping my video now.
Sure, sir. Sure, sir. So, yes, sir. Sir, another interesting question which has come up from one of our students is Vinya. I would like Vinya to ask that question from you, sir.
Yeah, please.
Yes, sir. Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
So I would like to ask you that what message would you like to give to those who wish to be authors? For that's a very unique sort of a career option.
Yeah. I think I addressed that earlier when I said, see, it's very important for an author, first of all, to be sure of what he or she wants to say, you know. So it is not just that, oh, I want to be an author, but I'm not sure what I want to talk about, as long as I write a book. So that's not a good enough reason for being an author. So if you want to be an author, I mean, I'm assuming it could be anything. You could be writing a murder mystery, you could be writing a historical novel, you could be writing a film. But it's very important that first of all, you know from within what is it that you want to say. So it could be a love story, but what is it specifically about that love story? Because there are a million love stories, you know. So what is it that makes your love story interesting? What is peculiar about it? So you must first be clear about that. So only ambition of being an author, or for that matter, anything, actor, runner, anything, is not enough, you know. And the second thing about an author, which is totally true, is that you have to put pen to paper, or in this digital world you have to type, you know. So you have to do writing. You cannot say I'm waiting for the perfect idea and then I'll start writing. I don't agree with that. I feel that you should, if you want to be a writer, if you want to be an author, you write something every day. You just write a short little anecdote, you write a little episode, you write about the weekend, you just keep writing and writing and writing. So there is no shortcut. To be a writer, you have to write.
Thank you, sir.
That's great answer, sir. Thank you so much. That would inspire most of our students to start writing now.
Wonderful.
Okay. Yes, sir. So another question coming up from Reet Mahajan. Yes, Reet. And students, kindly put on your video when you ask your questions.
Good evening, sir.
Yes, good evening.
So my question was that is it important to stick to medical and non-medical fields and then explore the rest of the options?
To explore medical. Sorry, I didn't get the first part of the question.
Sir, I was asking that is it important to stick to the medical and non-medical fields? Like first we should do some engineering or doctorate and then go for our other aims like being an author, like become a film director.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. You will see, you will find there have been lots of authors who have come from various, you know, they have directly either started writing, but there are some very good authors who, like for instance, Robin Cook, you know, if you heard that name, he writes medical thrillers. And there are people who write movies about war because they were soldiers or they were in war, or people who write about the finance world, you know. Now, if you have lived life in whatever way, then you can use that experience in your writing. But it is not necessary. It's not like I have to get up and say, oh, first I have to go and fight a war and then only can I write a war film. Not necessary. Yeah, but definitely, if that writing has to sound convincing, and the detailing, if you had gone through that. But I think your question is more about being academic. Like, do you need to first do engineering, or do you need to first become a doctor or a lawyer and then get into the writing field? That fear is there in everybody's mind, because they feel that those jobs, I mean, those fields can give you a job, whereas a writing job is very, very, you know, very risky, you know. So that is why most people, are you there? I mean, I'm not sure
Yes, sir.
if I'm
Yes,
still
sir.
connected.
She's there. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So it is not necessary that you first become a lawyer and then you start writing. It's not necessary at all. I mean, there have been many writers who have read 1,000 books. You have to read a lot for sure. So if you simply want to be a writer and you don't want to be a lawyer, or you don't want to be a doctor, or you don't want to be a engineer, then you read a lot and you learn the art of writing straight away. But at the same time, if your life has taken you through some journey or some experience, then that would help you write also. But everybody may not go that way. So you can do either. It depends where your life is.
Thank you,
Everybody
sir.
may not experience. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so
Thank you,
another
sir.
question coming from Shreyas. So Shreyas, please ask your question, please. Audience, kindly put your questions on the chat so that I can go through them.
Has all my audience run away?
No, sir, they are there. They are there, sir.
Okay.
Shreyas, please ask your question.
Sir, who has been your inspiration? Means, was it your family or any member or any specific thing maybe?
Well, as you noticed, Atul mentioned that I've done many different things in my life. You know, so yeah, when I was crazy about engineering, there was this classmate of mine who was really good at making all these gadgets and putting things together, and he would make a robot, and so he was my inspiration for that, to get into engineering and stuff like that. Then, as far as films go, yes, my father was my inspiration. But when it comes to what I'm doing today in my life, when I moved to a farm and all that, I have been inspired by different people, like who have been talking about where our world needs to go. So for instance, when I'm talking about now, these are not subjects that you will relate to, but like people's rights, how we don't give people their rights. We take away their land. When we say we want to build an airport here, or we want to build a factory here, we just throw out all the villagers, take their land, and make an airport there, and we don't care about what happens to them. For that, my inspiration has been Medha Patkar. If you don't know who that is, you can read up later, but she's a social activist. She's a lady who has fought for people's rights. So she is very, in my next book, which I have just about completing, I have got these characters in my book. So she's my inspiration for that. And see, my inspiration is not people like Elon Musk and all these guys. There is no time for me to explain to you, but my view of life is slightly different. I don't believe in this technology and a technological world. So most people would say, Elon Musk is their hero and stuff like that. Those are not my heroes. There's another inspiration that I had was a Japanese farmer. His name is Masanobu. He's no more, but his book, it's called One Straw Revolution. If I feel it should be a textbook in schools. So he's an inspiration to me. So my inspiration actually has not come from what most people would say. Oh, Gavaskar is my hero, or Salman Khan is my hero, and it does. So strangely, my heroes have not come from, or my inspirations have not come from there. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Welcome.
Sir, one more
to-
question I have.
Yes,
Yes,
Shreyas.
please.
If we don't have a plan for our future, is it good or bad?
Whoa! Now you're going to put me in trouble with your parents here. So, see, absolutely having no plan. I had no plan for a long time.
Okay.
Yes. When I came back from US, before I made Qayamat Se Qayamat Tak, I was exactly a no plan person. But even though I would say I had no plan, actually my plan was to run away from the city. So I did have a plan, So you cannot absolutely have no plan. It can be a plan which is which is very small plan or a very small thought. It is somewhere at the back of your mind. Maybe you cannot do it tomorrow. Maybe you cannot do it 5 years later. Maybe you cannot do it 10 years later, but it is still there. And in the meantime, while you're working on, that's exactly what happened to me. My real plan was to run away and come and live on a farm. It took me 23 years to do that, you know, but that was my plan. So, but in the middle, it doesn't mean that if your plan is not happening, you don't do anything else. You continue doing other things. Take a job, earn money, look after your family, you know, do whatever you have to. You can't just say, oh, my plan is that, therefore I'll not do anything else. I don't agree with that. So you must have a plan. It can be a long-term plan, but you have to continue doing other things serious and sincerely, you know. So along this whole journey, though I didn't want to make films, I made them sincerely. I was not interested in making films forever, but whatever I did in this journey was sincere. So yes, have a plan, but continue to live life sincerely.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Welcome.
Great, sir. Great inspiration to the, and some questions need to be tackled very nicely and very well tackled answers are here. So
Thank
another
you.
question coming from Prisha Anand here. Prisha, please unmute yourself.
Good evening, sir. I wanted
Yes.
to ask that do you think that dropping out after attaining such a high rank in JEE and that from MIT was a commendable decision?
So this kind of a question cannot have one answer for everybody. Okay. So I when I dropped out of MIT for a long time, I was not regretting, but I was feeling like a loser, or not a loser, but somebody who's being irresponsible and stuff like that, you know. But I was subconsciously, like the earlier lady asked that should you have a plan? I did have a plan. So at the end of the day, I was able to move towards my plan and therefore justify why I dropped out. I dropped out because I didn't want to continue doing engineering in a 9 to 5 job, and that was my reason for dropping out. I wasn't dropping out simply because I didn't want to work hard and study or anything like that. But you have to have a very good reason for if you are opting out. Like when I dropped out of making movies and I came to the farm, many people would say, oh my god, you were so successful and you were making such successful films, how could you drop out? But that's because I knew where I was going and I knew why I was doing it, you know. So simply dropping out for the sake of dropping out is not a good idea. So you definitely have to have some kind of an idea why you're dropping out.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Welcome.
Prisha, you have another question. That is very interesting one.
Yes,
Prisha.
ma'am. I have
Yes.
another question. Was there anyone in your life who tried to put you down, but your ambitious faith and composure made you reach heights of success?
Well, you know, I've been very lucky. I have always had very supporting people, including my wife and my parents, and you know, so I have not experienced that. You know, I've been lucky in that sense. But you know, I just want to add one thing to your question. Is like I just want to question your word success. You see, success can be a very internal kind of success also. You know, so. If today, if you ask somebody, they'll say, oh, Mansoor is not a success. He's dropped out now. He's not even making films. Now, that is their definition of success, you know. So, whereas I think I'm very successful. I've got a farm. We earn our money. We, you know, we do things. We educate kids who come here. We are organic. You know, we have. So, first of all, you must question that word success. Whether you know what success is, or are you living up to somebody else's success? So, don't just use the word success because it's a very misused word, you know, everywhere. If you make more money, you're successful, or if you're more popular, if you have more hits on your Twitter account, then you that. So you just be careful of how you use the word success. That's what I would say.
Right, sir. Okay. So last question we'll be taking up from Vibhuti Bhushan.
Yes.
Yeah. Good evening, Mansoor. It's certainly a privilege and pleasure to be part of this.
Thank you, Vibhuti.
Yeah, I had put three questions, so let me very quickly go through those, beginning with the easiest one. Just a
Yes.
curiosity, is the name Acresville named after that Jethro Tull song? There's this very nice Tull song by the same name. Any
Yes.
connection at all, or just speculative?
Yeah, no, you're right. It does, but it came about this way that when I was thinking of what should I name the farm, what should I name the
Right,
farm, and I was thinking of I was a Tull fan, but that song didn't come up straight in my mind, you know.
right.
So it's not like I said, oh, let me name it after Tull's song Acresville. The process that my mind took was that I was saying, okay, we're going to have a farm, but I don't want to have a all structured engineered farm, you know. I said it should be partly cultivated and partly wild. Partly cultivated, you know, these were the two words that were kind of echoing in my mind, you know. So that's what I believe in. I believe that we should not make everything cultivated. We have to leave the wild, you know. This is an ecological belief that I have. So because I was thinking of these two terms, that yes, you do need a little bit of cultivation and you need a bit of wild. From nowhere, the term Acresville popped in my mind, and I said, oh yeah, that's Tull's song. So that way, yeah.
Beautiful.
But acres has to do with farming. Acres is the farming term, you
Yes.
know. Yeah, and
Yeah.
wild, of course, is wild. Yeah.
Wild is what you have put there. Yes. Second question was, if you were making movies today, what kind of stories would you be telling? Let me expand a little bit on what I'm trying to say here. Your earlier, whether it was Kayamat Se Kayamat Tak, Jo Jeeta Wo Sikandar, you know, all these stories, they are essentially telling stories of a young lot. In many ways, many of these are coming of age stories. Today, if you were telling stories in India, what kind of stories would you be telling?
Yeah, good question. So again, I am telling. Actually, I'm working on the dearest book that I wanted to write. Not the third curve. The third curve just happened in between. And Atul, I believe you have shared my book with others. If third curve, if you haven't, please share it with everyone so they will, you know, get an idea. But before I wrote the third curve, right from 2000, I was actually working on a very different book, Vibhuti. I was working on a book which is again a coming of age book, but a coming of age not of a person, not of a country, not of a group, but a coming of age of a culture. And that book is a critique of civilization as a culture. So thank you for asking this question, because this has allowed me to bring in a thought which I'd like to leave you all with. You know, all of you know that the environment is collapsing, the forests are going, the species are getting extinct, the rivers are drying, the oceans are acidifying, the climate is changing. I'd like to ask all of you, who is causing all this?
It's us, essentially.
So the most common answer that is given, not the most common answer, the only answer that is given is man is causing all this. Now, this is the biggest lie. This is the biggest lie. Man is not causing it. Just one culture of man is causing it. In humans, there are 5,000 cultures. There are Adivasis, there are tribals, there are Kotas, there are Kurumbas, there are Sentinelese, there are Pygmies, there are Yanomamo. There are 5,000 cultures of humans who are not causing this. Only one culture called civilization is. This is something which people say, oh, civilization, no, man means civilization. What else? You know, but that's not true. So that is the book that I'm working on. It is a critique on civilization, and it goes through the whole gamut of what makes civilization a viral culture. Why is it that civilization, wherever it has gone, it has destroyed that place? So it is one culture of man that's doing it. This needs to be brought out in schools, in textbooks. We have to completely reverse this statement that man is causing it is a very, very false statement. You go to an Adivasi village, they haven't destroyed it. They haven't caused chemical pollution. They haven't thrown plastics all over. They haven't done industrial revolution. They haven't affected climate change. You go to any of these other 5,000 cultures who we call backward, you know, And civilization is the dominant culture that wipes out all of them. We wiped out 95% of the other indigenous cultures. They are the true humans. We are a viral form of a human. We are a viral culture. So that is the coming of age thought that I would make a film about, which I've actually written a screenplay also. But it's a very difficult subject because all subjects do not lend themselves easily to the visual medium. You know, am I online or am I?
Yes, sir.
You
Yes,
are.
sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. So so that subject. So if you to answer your question, what story would I tell? I would tell the story of civilization. I would tell the story of coming of age. Today we have to come of age because everybody is going around and just blaming all of mankind for it. That is the greatest injustice you can do. When only one culture is causing it, called civilization. We need to learn from the indigenous. We need to learn from the tribals. We need to learn from the what we call primitive cultures. So this is the big story that I would tell, and I'm working on it. Yeah.
That's a great idea, sir. And we will be looking forward for such kind of a movie. I think movies are mass influences and they will make an effect if you make such kind of a movie for us. We'll be looking for it, sir.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Atul, sir. So I'll just say, Sir Vibhuti, is like you need to ask some anything else?
I
Or we can wind up?
just said one more, if it's
Yes, sir.
slightly, maybe in a way, slightly, what I'm going to ask is perhaps slightly controversial or, contentious. So if you don't want to, don't answer that.
Certainly.
What I wanted to know was, do you think that today, like when movies are being made or stories are being told,
Yes.
they're done with the same kind of unfettered, freedom and liberty which was there, or there are limits that are being put within and without.
If you're talking, are you talking specifically about India or the world?
Uh, in the first instance, India, but now when you mention it, I think it's a broader thought about world also, actually. Yes.
Well, yeah. So obviously, when you say world, there are hundreds of countries. The thing is, India right now, as we all know, and is getting very touchy and very sensitive, and both from the from the government point of view, from the legal point of view, from even people's point of view. Even people are so touchy. If somebody says something about shows a Muslim like this, it's, hey, they're trying to malign the Muslims, then it'll all jump on the poor person. So what if he was showing a Muslim in a particular, what I mean? So the whole world has become extremely sensitive and extremely not willing to give a chance to be said. Even if it is, I'm not saying that you should say something which is unjustified. But yes, then the scope is narrowing down. The scope is narrowing down. Now, the only thing that is opening it up maybe is the web platform. So again, within India, it may be possible to make something on the web platform and it comes into India, so nobody can do anything about it. But I would find it very difficult to make certain themes which I had in my mind, and including this one which I'm talking, which does a critique of, let's say, the legal system, which does a critique of certain government policies. I mean, I'm writing it, but I would be very worried about it when it comes out, or especially if it's a film, because see, people may not read so many books. So a book will not get obstructed so easily. But when it comes to films, it's much more in the public limelight. It is much more in everybody's knowledge. It is definitely narrow. It is definitely narrow, and people are becoming narrow for very, very weird reasons. For reasons of nationalism. You can't criticize India. I said, why should I not critique India? India is my country. If I want India to improve, I will critique it. Why should I not? I critique my family. I critique my kids, and they critique me. So that is the belief system that I have. But sadly, when I look at some of the older films, they got away with saying quite a bit more. But these days, it would be difficult to do that. Yes.
Thank you.
So here you want to say that critique is another tool to improvise something. So that's the basic tool of being critic here.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, but my critique also has to hold water. I can't
Yes,
just go and criticize something and then, well, let it be,
yes,
Mahesh Bhatt, I had met him a couple of times. Mahesh Bhatt has always been the guy who believes in zero censorship. He believed that you come out and say it. And if it is really rubbish, the people will throw you out themselves. Let the public be the judge of whether that is a sensible, critique or not. You don't need a censor in between. You don't need the censorship. You don't need the censor board. So he was very against the idea of a censor board. Yeah.
So that was a great inspiration and so good talk with you, sir. Atul, sir, so I would like to end the meeting here. I would like to say a vote of thanks for everybody.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed talking to you all.
So on behalf of the team Mindtree, sir, I would like to thank you and for your precious time to embolden our students and making them more determined to not to let the noise of others' opinions drown out their inner voice. So thank you, Atul,
Absolutely.
sir, for being a guiding light always. And last but not the least, thank you, dear audience, for being part of it. Goodbye, everyone. On a positive note, to meet up next time with yet another inspiring personality. We end the meeting here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, all
Thank you,
of you.
Mansoor. Thank
Bye-bye.
you, Mansoor.
Thanks,
Yeah, I'll kind
thanks,
of catch
Atul.
up with you on
Thanks
the
for
phone
making the time.
sometime. Bye.
Sure. Yeah. Bye.